Welcome to our Lunch and Learn series, brought to you by the UAlbany Innovation Center and Innovate 518, New York's Capital Region Innovation Hotspot Program. We work together to support technology-driven startups in New York's Capital Region. Through the Innovation Hotspot Program, qualifying companies can operate tax-free for up to 5 years when they meet state criteria and are affiliated with a New York incubator. As a regional network, Innovate 518 brings together partner incubators so founders can access the right space, coaching, and community for their company. The UAlbany Innovation Center is a technology-focused physical incubator. In addition to the New York State tax incentive programs, we offer educational programming, networking, business coaching with entrepreneurs and residents, and connections to UAlbany researchers and students with strengths in climate and environmental science, biotech, forensics and cybersecurity, advanced data analytics, and nanotech/semiconductors. Inside the eTech building, UAlbany's hub for research and entrepreneurship, members get affordable rates starting at $150 per month, a bright, clean work environment with new furniture, meeting spaces, utilities, and access to community and culture found in an R1 academic institution. Don't forget to ask us about the NVIDIA supercomputer access for member companies. Across the river at UAlbany's Health Sciences campus, there's over 500,000 square feet of lab, office, and common space, alongside major industry neighbors like Regeneron and Curia. It's a flexible environment for life science startups to grow with wet lab space. If you'd like to get more involved, email innovationcenter@albany.edu or scan the QR code to connect with us. We're glad you're here. Enjoy today's session.
Okay. So this first slide, this is the no asshole rule by Bob Sutton, who is a Stanford professor. And when this book came out 20 years ago, I was hesitant to even tell people I read it, but I think it's really important when you talk about culture. So, by the way, my partner in crime and in business, Chris Wessel, is here with me. So I'm going to probably talk to Chris periodically because we overlap. So typically, if I were to really do a brain dump that would get you going to get ready for your first hire, it would take at least a day to share all of the information that you need to know. So I'm just kind of skimming along the surface, but the really important stuff, like fines, don't be an asshole. So number one, don't be an asshole. If you care about culture, don't be an asshole and don't retain assholes. So Bob Sutton calls them brilliant jerks, right? And my experience, particularly before I started my business, working in larger companies, they were usually the heads of sales. And, they did a great job, but they annihilated everybody internally. And we lost people because of them. So if you're looking to hire, in terms of what Chris talked to you about last week, so especially in this area, we are small, and it's been made even smaller because of social media. So if you have brilliant jerks or you're the brilliant jerk, people are not going to want to interview with you or stay with you. So if you care about culture, and I think we do, it starts with you. There's, what is it? It's a Polish or an Italian saying, a fish rots from the head down. So listen, and Chris has known me for 20 years. I was born in New York City. I sometimes scare people who were born here. I have to control myself. But I work really hard to walk the talk of this because I love what I do. So this is really important. Word gets out. There's Glassdoor, but word of mouth and text messaging, that's an even quicker way of people spreading bad news about the reputation of yourself and your company. Yes, Chris.
Well, and one of the things we touched on that overlaps last month was your first hires are important culture builders.
That's right.
And you are. When it's just you, right?
Right.
So it all stems from you.
That's right. So what I recommend is it takes self-awareness to identify yourself as a brilliant jerk. I kind of am a brilliant jerk, but I really love what I do, and I can't be a brilliant jerk and do the work I love to do. So I have worked really hard on myself to practice what I preach. So If you're struggling with culture, it starts with you. So it's important to have self-awareness of yourself first if you want to build your culture. So because employee turnover is a money pit. It can be what now? It used to be a lot lower. The time, money, and hiring people like us to replace somebody. I mean, we work together on controller. Chris is great at finding controllers, by the way. Thank God for Chris. But the total cost can be 100 to 150% of what you were paying the person. And you think of training and recruiting and getting them up to speed.
Lost productivity.
Lost productivity. So, you know, there are very money-driven cost reasons. I believe in what I'm talking to you about today from a values standpoint, but I'm also very pragmatic. I'm also a business owner, been a business owner for 17 years. And if you don't understand anything I'm talking about, it'll cost you money if you don't pay attention to it. So there's that old saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So what we're talking about, we're talking about the no asshole rule, the asshole survival guide, you focusing on yourself, doing your own personal inventory. We're talking about anxiety. So if your work, now there's good anxiety, it's fun to work with startups, that's good anxiety, but then there's horrible anxiety, which makes people leave. So anxiety and fear kills culture and it will feed turnover. So we're talking about psychological safety. I don't know if you've heard that term, but at the heart of it, and like I said, I've been doing this for over 30 years, we never talked about anxiety. It's anxiety, and people will either dump on somebody else, or they'll just spread the good word and make everybody anxious. So we're talking about anxiety and fear. You can't have a good culture if that's prevalent in your workplace. So this is, I think, some of the ways that you can kill anxiety and feed your culture. Work on yourself first. Get an executive coach. We know people. If you haven't taken an assessment, Chris is a predictive index partner. I'm an everything disc partner. They're great. It's hard data to help you start to learn about yourself so you can modulate your communication and not scare people. I scare people. I'm a DI. I forgot my say. So we're both DI in everything disc. And my husband is a C, conscientious, and he's my exact opposite. I've been with him for 35 years. When we're in the house together, I literally have to text him if I need him to know something important. And then he'll walk up to my office. He has to think about it. So you got to be aware of how your personality impacts your employees, how your communication style impacts your employees, and talk to them where they are, not where you are. I mean, I'd be thrilled if everybody was like me and Chris.
You would, but you wouldn't, because one of the mistakes I made early on too was hiring a lot of people like me and then not realizing that there's the right person for each kind of role.
Right.
And you want compliments, right? And a partner and I, when we had a business for like 10 years, it was the two of us and we were very similar and that worked. Then we started hiring more people and it didn't work.
You need a mixture.
Yeah.
You need a mixture in the workplace.
And you don't know how to communicate with them, because I remember I hired my first employee and I was like, oh, this is working out great. And then we hired more people and I was like, what's wrong with these people?
Right.
Because who knew? You have to relate to people differently.
Well, you do. And again, this is something that has been really big in the last 20 years or so. We didn't, when it started my career, it was basically, you had to learn union relations. You had to know how to lay people off. It was not strategic HR. So this is very strategic.
And your boss used to be like, here's how I work.
Here's how
you had to learn it. And
do
now
what I
it's
say.
more like,
Right.
How do you prefer to be managed?
Correct.
Because,
that's right. It's leadership versus management. Now you have to do a little management, but we're talking about leadership. So clean your house, take an assessment, ask some trusted professionals in your sphere, to give you some feedback. I certainly have done all of those. And so what kills anxiety and builds culture is that both you and your employees need autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And if you haven't read Drive, wow, what a great book. but it's not just your employees, it's you. And, you know, again, fish rots from the head down. They're looking at what you do. They're looking at how you're working on yourself. So a great book and something to think about. One of the too many things I do, I facilitate strategic planning. I'm a big proponent of having a strategic plan. So a strategic plan is part of your business plan, but I really like the one-page ones. They're easy to understand, they're easy to communicate, and your employees need to know where you're going. So they can see on one page what the goals are, especially because the strategic goals are going to cascade down to the work they do, their goals. It's really important to get your strategy, your plan on one page. And so it's really simple and easy to understand. And SMART goals are super important in a strategic plan, but also for employee goals. Again, they're anxiety killers, they're culture feeders, they build up your culture. So there's no such thing, Chris, as over communication. I started out in employee communications. I started out at General Electric, and I always thought that employee communications was, I think HR was better. Employee communications is critical to people ops. So make sure you have a strategic plan. There are lots of one-page templates, but again, I don't have a lot of time to talk about this. I teach a strategic planning workshop for the Rensselaer County Regional Leadership Institute, the Chamber, and we have a whole day on strategic planning. But a strategic plan has your vision, what you hope to be or become, your mission, what you do, your purpose, why you exist, and core values, the principles that you aspire to. So for someone who works in employee relations, and this is really, to me, this is fascinating as I progress in my career, because again, I started out in General Electric, but, you know, just lay them off or, you know, tell the union what to do. To have stated values that are real. And these are Albany stated out values. By the way, I'm an alum, happy to be back. And it's so important to have core values that you communicate over and over again, because that is a tool for a number of things, including but not limited to when an employee is not meeting expectations. You bring them back to the values. If they're not acting within the values, then you can point to something tangible, because otherwise they think it's a personal conflict with you. So access, integrity, inclusive, excellence, I like that one, and common good. And this is best practice. You know, you don't only have the word or two words, you also explain what they mean. And this is the right number of values. If you have more, they get confused. I
visited a company that had them on the wall. I think they had about 12 or 15 of them, which is
way to
keep
that's
track
crazy.
of. And I'm sure they don't reference those regularly because it's just it's too many.
No. So it has to be easy to understand. And again, there's no such thing as over communication to your employees. I don't think I've ever been in a situation where an employee or a group of employees has said, stop, I know, stop talking to me, stop sending me this information. You can never communicate enough, because people learn differently. People are visual, you know, audio, you know, kinesthetic. They have to do it in order to learn it. So, you know, this is also related to how you communicate effectively with them, is how do they get embedded productively and positively in your culture. So when we talk about optimizing onboarding, I'm not talking about new hire paperwork. I'm talking about being proactive and managing their psychological safety to make sure they feel safe within the first day or week. So especially in startups, it's really important for them to have plans. What do you want them to do? And job description doesn't cut it. Job descriptions, by the way, are important, and they're like watching paint dry. Job descriptions are central to people ops. But I wouldn't use them as a crutch, but you need them. But, you know, giving them SMART goals, giving them key performance indicators, again, these are all anxiety reducing. And you also make sure that they're on track with what you want them to do in the business. So here are some of the things I used to hate in my generation, because they talk about Generation Z, for example. They don't like it when they're spoken to harshly. Oh, by the way, all generations don't like it when you're spoken to harshly. Okay. So the only difference between me and my kid, who's 25 years old, is that he feels psychologically safe enough to say it. We were never allowed to say it. So, I look at Generation Z and the generations after them. It's like, yes, keep talking, keep putting it in social media, because
don't have to suck it up as much as we did.
That's right. No, that's right. I mean, it served its purpose in terms of resiliency, but it was very anxious. It didn't need to be that way. So, so don't bed check. One of the things I used to do at General Electric, I think every job I had, the general manager or the head of the business would walk around at 5:30 to make sure that we were still in our offices, because there was hardly remote work. I actually had a laptop. My first laptop was 20 pounds. I actually worked from home in the evening. It didn't count as my 40 hours or my 50 hours, because I was a recruiter back then. And you couldn't talk to candidates during the day. You could only talk to them at night. But they would check and see if you were working past 5 or if you were early, right? So again, this works for all generations. It's not just my kids' generation. Is flexibility. They care so much more about flexibility. I think the surveys really reinforce this time and again, that flexibility and schedule is critical. So I love swag. One of my clients, the first time I talked to him, he said, I talked to him for 45 minutes. He said, "What do I owe you?" I said, "I'd like a sweatshirt," and he yelled at me. So send me an invoice. But swag is great. I love swag. I love other people's swag, but it is a small component of getting them started on a path where they feel psychologically safe. So here's some other, I don't want to talk about these at length, because I want to leave time for questions. And I only have an hour, and as Chris knows, I could talk for 3. So these are really low cost, sticky employee engagement tools to think about. Equity and options. We were just talking about equity and options. So one of my the 2 Fortune 500 companies where I was an HR leader, FYE Music and Movies and Boston Scientific, we got options, and they were life-changing. But you have to be big enough, frankly, to have a stock option program where they can actually mature and the employees can cash them in. And as Chris said, if you give them equity and options, you're stuck with them.
Oh yeah, referring to last month. Yeah.
Yeah.
For those who weren't here.
That's right. Financial transparency, open book. You don't have to talk about what everybody makes, but talk to them about how the financials are doing. They want to know, because otherwise they get anxious. So think about being a little bit more open book. I hate annual performance reviews with a passion. I've hated them my entire career. They are an instrument of terror. I believe in one-on-ones once a week, if possible. If you want to give your employees some feedback on their performance, you schedule a quarterly meeting for that. I love EOS, the entrepreneurial or the operating system. Thank you. I want to say organization. Yeah. The entrepreneurial operating system. That is a great book, by the way. And it has some great tools, including a great performance review that's 1 page. Awesome. But if you want to review their performance, I think monthly is great. But you don't have to write War and Peace to do a performance review on them. It can be 1 page or less. So think about that. I hate performance reviews that way. Professional development. I want to tell you, in terms of the best managers that I had, they were also my mentors. They saw me advancing in my career, even when I didn't. I had one manager who thought I'd be the head of HR at GE. I think he was smoking something, but I did not want that job. But help your employees dream. If you see potential in them. I can't tell you, I worked 65 hours a week for this guy, and he didn't expect that from me, but I was so, I felt so safe with him. He believed in me. So that has a very important tool that you can help your employees see where they might be going. And even more importantly, that you see their talent and you acknowledge it. I mean, what a concept, right? To have a mentor or manager say, this is what I see you doing. Are you interested in that? Because I'm going to help you.
Can make your hiring a little less challenging too, because
Absolutely.
hiring is always hard, but like if you got someone internal that there's trust and there's organizational knowledge and all that, and there's a path you can grow them into,
Yeah.
that key role you want to hire for, it might be better to move them towards it and hire for something less experienced.
Yeah.
So you can, it benefits the business quite a bit.
And, I think Kelly talked about it there, especially for a very small business or a small startup, there are resources for you to develop your employees. And I don't want to go into all of them, but it doesn't all have to come from the owner or the owners. Mental health and wellness is huge. We have to have that front and center. It's the same as physical wellness. Because if we're not paying attention to it and we're not supporting employees on it, they're going to leave, and they do leave. Now, team building. I think it's great to go on a retreat with your employees where you talk about your strategic plan and you talk about how they're going to fit into it. And then, you build in some fun and some meals together. So get out of your work environment. And they're part of your brain trust, especially if you're a startup or you're very small.
Could I just could I chime in on the mental health thing?
Chime in.
The challenge that a lot of people have when it comes to the mental health piece is that a lot of people they suffer in silence.
Yes.
They don't bring it to your attention. It is your responsibility as a leader to recognize if your people are approaching burnout, and you may have to tell them. You don't wait until they tell you they need a mental health day. Like you really have to be like, hey, you've been burning the candle at both ends. You should probably, once you take the afternoon off, or why don't you let's shift some of your work responsibility, like, because it is a lot of that responsibility is incumbent on a manager, leader,
or a business owner, right?
Or owner, and you just got to look for that, because they're not going to always tell you, and if they tell you, it might be too late.
And we never talked about that in the earlier in my HR career, and that was a shame. We had employee assistance programs, but we never talked about.
Yeah, you still waited for them to raise their hand and say they need help. Yeah.
Right. You've got to, if you want to mentor your employees, that's a big piece of this. And office snacks and beer keggers on Fridays. Yeah, that's okay. I think it's a nice
table. And
I'm sorry, what?
The foosball tables, remember, like the foosball tables and all that stuff.
Oh, that's right. Oh, that's right.
The staple of all like tech startups was like a foosball table and like the keg and like,
Autotask, they would do that every Friday, and then they had a Thanksgiving luncheon where they would deep fry turkeys on the outside on their patio, which I think was not okay from an OSHA standpoint, from a safety standpoint, but they really understood employee engagement. That was a fun client to work with. They were one of my first clients. Okay, let's talk about the boring stuff. But the boring stuff is important because the boring stuff, if you don't do it right, it's going to cost you money without question. So I-9s are really important right now. I had a client a couple of years ago. They were a small startup, and it was the first meeting I was having with the owner. And they had a binder instead of they had a binder where they kept their personnel files. I was like, okay, you can keep them electronically, that's fine, as long as you lock it up. And I was looking through the personnel files, and I said, where's your I-9? And they said, what's an I-9? So it's really important to, if you don't understand the bureaucratic pieces of it, this has become really important. And I can give you a quick piece of advice. Keep your I-9s in a separate binder and lock them up, because if Homeland Security comes and wants to audit your I-9s, they're not auditing your files or your electronic files. You're just giving it to them. But this is really important. Hey, wow. I want to tell you, whenever there's a problem with a paycheck, the way I was trained is if you screw up somebody's pay, that's the worst thing you can do. to an employee. So during the pandemic, I have several veterinary hospital clients, and one owner was on Long Island, and I was talking to him about overtime. And I said, so who's your, he had 30 employees, and he was the doctor there too. So who's your payroll vendor? Oh, I do it myself. You do it yourself in QuickBooks? You don't have time for that. Why don't you get a payroll vendor? Oh, no, I do paper and pencil. Oh my God. So it is so easy to make payroll errors if you're not working with a payroll company. And some of these smaller payroll companies, and I don't get a kickback from ConnectPay, just so you know, they're a local payroll company. They also provide some basic HR compliance support. So that's something to think about. I think QuickBooks needs to be a little bit more honest. It's really a risk to run your payroll through QuickBooks.
Yeah, you really have to know what you're doing. It's very like self-directed, like it's there. I use QuickBooks Online.
Yeah, but you
could do it, but you need to know what you're
right.
doing. Whereas a payroll company, a lot of times they have as a value add these additional services.
Yeah.
And that like listen, you gotta have like quarterly payroll taxes, you gotta pay that kind of stuff. Like QuickBooks isn't gonna remind you of all these things.
Right. It's better to have somebody else do it for you. Have a subject matter expert do that for you.
Yeah, they don't charge that much.
Talking about tax-free zones, I had a client who was in a startup New York zone, and I always learned, you learn about each other through the initial intake meeting. And I said, so, what's going on? What payroll vendor do you use? Oh, we don't have payroll right now. I said, okay. How do you have employees? Well, we're in the startup New York zone, so we don't have to pay payroll taxes, and we can hold off on paying our employees. I said, who told you that? That is not correct. So get the pay right, because we don't, I'll show you in a minute that the penalties are huge. It's really a big financial hit, and no one can afford that. Yes.
How about that company we worked with out Western New York, that startup that they didn't have health. I don't know if health insurance is one of the things we were covering, but like they didn't have health benefits set up. But they were like, oh no, super nice people that were running these brilliant scientists, really nice people. They thought they were helping out by basically if an employee had a medical bill, they just reimbursed it. They'd reimburse them for the medical bill. And we were like, no.
Yeah, that's illegal. It was very kind.
Good intention.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions. But and I worked with a great broker. Chris pulled me in, and we got a health plan up and running for them in 2 weeks. But some of these things that I walk into, I never want to say I see everything, because then something weird happens. So that's really important. Don't reimburse your employees for medical costs
in lieu of insurance.
In lieu of insurance, right? So another one of many pitfalls. That's why job descriptions are so important for so many reasons. Don't make all of your employees salary exempt. You really need a job description to understand if they are really salary exempt, or if they're hourly non-exempt, and if they're hourly, they're eligible for overtime for any hours worked over 40 in New York State. So if you were to be audited, and I've seen this happen to clients, they would make a clerk salaried exempt, and they would be going to the audit and the Department of Labor, and we can get audited not only by New York State but also the feds. There are 2 audit branches. I actually sat on a panel with some federal Department of Labor folks, and we were talking about job descriptions. And I said, so I like to have the employees sign them. I like them to do a work task inventory, that they say what percentage of what work they're doing every week. And I want them to, and then they said, you should have them sign that, because when hopefully you won't get audited, but when an auditor comes in, they're not going to want to talk to the owner. They're going to want to talk to your employees. And they're going to ask you, the first thing they're going to ask you for are the job descriptions. So again, they're like watching paint dry. But thank you, AI. You can actually at least get a draft and make sure they're compliant. By the way, one of the things that's not in the presentation, at least meet an employer side labor attorney. You want to meet that person before you need them. And if you're getting liability insurance, look at an employment practices liability insurance rider. I was at I was at a meeting yesterday. And we were, oh, I know, I was at a group that Chris and I belong to, Capital Region Business Owners. And the broker who helped us with the health plan in Western New York, they were presenting. And I said, they were talking about employment practices liability insurance. It's a rider on your general liability. And I'll talk about insurance in a minute. And I said, so I like to see $1 million. I know that could be expensive. They said, yeah, that's what we want to see. We want to see $1 million. Because even if it's a false claim, because that insurance pays for your lawyer, that can cover penalties. Even if it's a false claim, it adds up. So that's great insurance to have. That's why you need a job description. Let's talk about independent contractors. So I actually had a couple of questions. Thank you for your questions in advance. They're super helpful. Actually, a lot of them, I got them right as I was finishing my presentation. So it is where employers get in trouble when they assume they can just pay through a 1099. So there is a list of 20 characteristics on the state and federal level that tell you what defines an independent contractor. So if you're looking for examples of what defines an independent contractor, Chris and I, we meet all those requirements. We have multiple clients. We have an office. We're in the same office.
We have our own insurance.
We have our own insurance. We have websites.
Yeah.
Right. So they look for all of that. And if they don't have those characteristics, they're an employee.
And I've had some companies I've worked with where the owner's like, oh, I have everybody set up like a DBA or an LLC. I have them all get some basic liability insurance. So they're all independent contractors. I'm like, no, but you're still directing the work. You're still providing the resources. You're still dictating when, like, that still meets like the requirements to be an employee.
Right.
Because they have to have a fair amount of autonomy if they're actually an independent contractor.
They do. They have to be like us.
Yeah.
They
So
really do.
Sometimes you try to check a couple boxes and then they're like, oh yeah, they're independent contractors.
No, you gotta really fulfill all of those requirements. So this is what the Department of Labor is auditing if they come in and visit you. And by the way, I'm not the type of consultant that threatens you and says, oh, you got to work with me or this will happen. I want you to know you don't need to work with me so that you can protect yourself. So I have a nonprofit client. They have 4 employees, and I've done 6 webinars for their professional organization. And the executive director calls me up and he said, hey, the Department of Labor is coming to visit. I said, oh my God, did you call the lawyer? He said, oh no, she was great. She was really friendly. I said, and I knew he used a lot of 1099s. And I said, yeah, so they're coming to look at your 1099s to make sure that they're not employees. So make sure your 1099s not only are in order, but that you're confident that they all look like me. And that's exactly what they did. They came in and they audited the 1099. So back when, earlier in my career, Department of Labor kind of ignored small businesses. I don't know why, but as time has progressed, this is an income source. This is a profit center for these agencies. So they're auditing hair salons. They're auditing everyone. They're making surprise visits.
It's low hanging fruit for them.
It really is. It's fishing in a barrel. It totally is. So, there is also, so the client that wasn't filing payroll taxes, so it's called a New York State 45. It's a combined form quarterly where you are paying your payroll taxes, your unemployment insurance, huge. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. If you don't have unemployment insurance, you don't have this all set up for your first employee, you really are exposing yourself financially. Am I scaring people, Kelly? You're smiling at me.
No, I've been through it.
Oh my God, God bless you. So the fines are huge. They can fine you up to $1,000 per employee. And they can fine you up to $10,000 per quarter if you do not fill out the form and pay these taxes correctly. So their current hot button issues are not only independent contractors. Their hot button issues are your employees really exempt? So I think this was the same client who didn't have I-9s. They called me up and they said, hey, My employee who's salaried exempt, they told me that I was out of compliance. I said, okay, I asked, what salary are you paying them? $34,000 a year. So the minimum exempt salary level in New York State is 75 times the minimum wage. So today for upstate New York, $16 an hour times 75 is $1,200 a week, which is $62,400 annually. So if you're paying anybody below that, you got to make a decision. And usually the decision is converting them to hourly non-exempt, because that's what the Department of Labor wants you to do. So that is very important to know. Don't let your employees, so if you're a for-profit, your employees can't volunteer for you. You have to pay them. So don't let them work off the clock. And sometimes, and I've seen this, employees want to help you and save costs. Tell them that's not helping. So other hot button issues are misclassifying employees and 1099s, disability accommodations. That is becoming a real hot button issue, and particularly pregnancy. So from when they're pregnant to when they have the baby to afterwards, there are a lot of things to be aware of. And I use Google too. Just so you know, I love Gemini. I love AI. I know I use it to confirm what I know. And that's the way I was trained. You don't just speak contemporaneously. So I always say to my client, I was talking to somebody at our business group yesterday. He was asking me about, he was hiring somebody new, and when does paid family leave kick in? I said, I believe they have to work for you 26 weeks for it to kick in, because they were hiring a pregnant woman, which was wonderful. And so I went to Gemini and said, and confirmed it. So I always check what I know. And sometimes Google and Gemini, they're not correct. You have to go to the agency website or go to a law firm website and they'll confirm it. So here's,
because you can have a little confirmation bias when you're looking something up. Like if you're looking for an answer to meet your needs, like you'll find the answer you're looking for.
That's right. Yeah, that's true. So these are some of the compliance costs. Wage underpayment. So look back for a payroll issue is 6 years. So that's why we want you to keep your payroll records and your pay records, because New York looks back 6 years. Wage statement errors, there's this, idiotic wage theft prevention form you have to fill out when you hire an employee and when you cut their pay. And if if there's not filled out correctly, they can fine you $5,000 per employee. There are plaintiff's attorneys who go after employers because it's like fishing in a barrel. That notice of pay and not paying employees, that's a huge violation. There's the Trapped at Work Act. So basically, this was very common where we'd hire a professional. Chris, I'm sure you've experienced this. I think we would do it for relocation. Mostly is that, we gave you $10,000 to relocate. You can't leave, you can't resign for 2 years or else you have to pay us back. So that's what Trapped at Work is. So $1,000 to $5,000 per occurrence.
You get that a bit too with education reimbursement.
That's right.
I think that's another popular way to do
You
that.
can't, if you leave, you got to pay us back. So it's now illegal in New York. And I-9 violations. Oh, by the way, were you aware, if you're here in Albany, but it's also in New York State, you can't ask salary history when you're good, So you can't ask an employee for salary history. You can ask them what they're looking for, but you can't ask the salary history anymore, because that we'd ask for salary history and then we'd give them a 5% increase over what they were making.
I did it.
I did too, and that was not great. So I think that's good that the employee asks what they need. So get your essential insurance policies in place. There's workers' comp. There's New York State unemployment insurance. I have a colleague, I think he has 3 employees. He called me up and he said, the Department of Labor just visited. I said, oh, I'm sorry. And he said, they fined me $4,000 for not having unemployment insurance. I said, yes, that's what the penalty is. So make sure, workers' comp, that is regulatory. unemployment insurance, statutory, that, short-term disability, employment practice liability insurance, like I mentioned. And a lot of small employers can't afford these benefits right away. If you're going to offer health insurance or dental or vision, work with a benefits broker. Don't try to go out on the marketplace and do it yourself. We know some good benefits brokers. Unemployment at will is a myth. I get this all the time. I want to let this employee go. Okay, what do you got in the file? Nothing. It's an employment at will state. Like, yeah, no, it isn't. It's a farce because there's so many requirements. We have very strong non-discrimination laws. There is really no such thing as employment at work. Well, even though we put them in offer letters,
Yeah.
there's no such
You
thing.
put it in there, but it's contradicted by numerous protections.
That's right.
Yeah.
Correct. Thank you. You said it even better than I did. And you know, I guess I invite you to audit yourself before somebody else audits you. Okay, so I answered your questions. These are great questions, by the way. What is the approximate cost? Okay, this is what is cheaper, an employee or a 1099 consultant? Make sure you use job description. Make sure there's so many requirements that if you screw it up, you're going to get fined. So I don't even want to answer this question.
The only caveat I would have to that is if you were to define consultant as like
Us.
somebody like one of us, as like
right.
a fractional resource,
Yes.
like that's
That's
fair.
We
But
can-
like
we
you
can
might
tell
you
you
might want to look at like, okay, is it time to bring on a full-time employee yet? Or can some of the functions I need to perform be met by
Right.
a couple of like fractional consultants? So whether it's a fractional CFO or HR or whatever.
Yep.
That you could do a cost comparison on, and that's fine. But when someone says consultant, if they mean like independent contractor, not so much. So it depends on how you define the word, right?
Well, also, when I was starting up my business, they weren't really regulating this very much. So
Right.
I was working with a bunch of software developer folks. I actually went to a training and they were explaining to me, yeah, you know, we're always 1099. When we go work for a software development company, we don't want to be employees. We want all the money up front. They weren't really 1099s. So an employee, a new hire or an applicant will sometimes say to you, I want to be a 1099. You have to make sure it's coloring within the lines. So thank you, Chris. I'm glad you're here, Chris. What are the tax implications to a business for a new employee? So it's New York State and federal payroll taxes, deductions for Social Security and New York State disability, New York State unemployment insurance costs. Typically, the cost of an employee is 1.5 times their base salary, depending on the benefits you offer. Is that right?
Yeah. Typically, it's been like 20% if you're not really offering like fringe benefits, but then if you're offering like health insurance and other things, it's closer to like that 40%.
Yeah. Thank you. So are there SBA programs that help pay for hiring employees? I believe I have an SBA loan from the pandemic that was like 2%, and I'm taking years to pay it off. I think it's like $200 a month. There is, I believe, an SBA loan. I think it's called 7A. I'm not an SBA subject matter expert, so check into that. So there may be a loan program to help you pay for this. Do economic development zones help mitigate the costs of onboarding? No. Do federal and state governments provide software platforms or systems to help you do all this? No.
Well, that's part of the problem is all the information is in different places.
That's
and
right.
Different regulations, federal, state,
right.
county, whatever. So like it's like not even one of them couldn't do that because it's not all encompassing.
Yep. So, and thank you. You asked some questions that I've already covered. How do you help them understand a new hire? What are the expectations in the first month? I covered that. This one I don't understand. How would you hire someone in your profession when you're just a student who is also trying to figure it out, like a software developer? So my answer to this question is there's a local SBA office. It's Kate, right? She's in now. Okay, it's in the building. They can help you figure that out. There are lots of free consulting resources.
So related to that and some of the costs,
Yeah.
one of the things I shared last month that some of you might have not heard. and I want to get your take on it too. Not quite a PEO, but like an EOR, employer of record.
Yes.
It's one of the resources that I personally use. As I have no employees, but sometimes I have interns, and I have like a couple offshore resources, but it's different because they're through contracting companies. But whenever I bring my interns on, I pay them W-2 through an employment. If you look up EOR, employer of record services, in Google, you'll find tons of companies that do this. And basically, you
You're
pay them
renting
a
it.
flat rate.
You're
Yeah,
renting
they are employed by this company who
Right.
provides benefits, who does all the other stuff, who holds all the insurances.
Which is great.
And you pay a flat amount, let's say they mark it up 25% or whatever.
Right.
It's a good interim solution because it doesn't scale well, right? Like after you have a certain amount, because what happens is like my sister has a tattoo shop in Clifton Park, and she's like, most of my employees were the typical like salon model, right? But
Right.
then she had to hire someone to work the front desk, W-2. And I was like, well, you gotta get change your liability insurance, you gotta get workers'
Yeah.
comp, you got like. The thing about when I had like 50 something employees, like the workers' comp policy wasn't that expensive relative to all of them, but when you have one employee, that $500 a year, $1,000 a year or whatever, the cost of setting all those up for like one person is pretty meaty. If you get to a certain point after you have a certain number of employees, and it probably varies depending on your own costs, it makes sense to get your own insurances. But like something like an EOR could be a good intermediary step, even for somebody like that, who's like, I want to be able to pay somebody and I want to do it right, but I don't have all this stuff set up.
So,
Your thoughts on that?
this is much more, I've used that my entire career. This is a much more primitive version.
Yeah.
We would work with a temp agency.
Right, which does.
Right, we work with a temp agency, and it would be a way for us to try out employees. So if the employee worked out in the first month or so, we would pay a fee to the temp agency so that we could then hire them directly. I actually think that's a good model.
And so as someone who used to own a temp agency for a long time too, I can tell you, sometimes someone would want to employ someone, they had like a small business and they were like, I have the person, I just don't have a means to employ them. And I'd say, all right, I'll run them through my system, I'll put them on my payroll, I still got to charge you something. But I'll tell you, if you do go to a temp agency, nothing against them, their model is mainly built on like finding people, providing to you. So their margins are a little different.
50,
so like
60%
right.
of the salary.
And even if they cut you a deal, like,
Yeah.
because they still got to make some money.
Right.
It's not the most ideal model, but like if that EOR one's a little leaner, because those are geared like specifically for that situation.
Yeah.
But either way, you're compartmentalizing the risk by transferring the employment risk to another organization.
It's a great tool. That's something.
Just at a certain point, it stops making sense, like a lot of conveniences do. There's a certain point where the cost makes sense to just do this stuff yourself.
That's great. Thank you, Chris. I'm so happy you're here. Entrepreneur advice, start where you are. I was a freelance technical writer right out of college, and my whole HR career. So start where you are. Start with a side gig. And I mean, that's how I started my business. I mean, for years, my friends who own businesses, I would get like 3 or 4 calls a week when I was an inside HR person. And, I was already working in my business, but I wasn't being paid for it. But so start where you are. I helped my husband start his custom framing business. We closed it, I think, 15 years ago. And he always said that was a rehearsal for my business. And I'm like, what business would I have? He was right. Where do we find talent? A number of ways in real life. That's why I started going to networking functions, because I was collecting candidates. I would collect business cards. Now I connect with people on LinkedIn. So I use LinkedIn, job boards. For some jobs, they're ridiculous. Really, it's through the network, through recommendations, in real life and virtual. And Chris, for high level positions, I just go to Chris. It's just easier. I mean, am I a competent recruiter? Yes, he's better than me.
But yeah, and there's, as far as like building up that network too, like stuff like Startup Tech Valley, like we've been going at for years. Kelly used to run it.
Yeah.
I think it's here next month. Be hosted here.
We're going.
Or this month. Stuff like that. You just never know who you're gonna bump into. And some of you probably already go to some of this stuff too. I haven't gone to some of that in a little while.
That's where we find candidates too.
Right. You find people, like there's so many people in the ecosystem. There's investors, there's owners of companies, there's people looking to find work, people looking to partner. Like it's just tremendous.
I think, Kelly, you actually had boards where, people would say, I'm looking for a job. The employers would say, I'm looking for employees.
Yeah,
those were actually great.
A lot of matchmaking, yeah.
Yeah, that was great. So that's how we do it. So this is, I think, an issue I see a lot is should I just work with somebody I know because I trust them versus prioritizing talent? And it's really hard to hire your friends and family because you may have to fire them. And even if you don't fire them, it causes a lot of drama. I work with a number of family businesses and it does get in the way. So I would go for the talent first. I know it, you're instinctively, you want to work with somebody you already know and trust. Go for the talent.
Well, that's where the networking comes in handy too.
That's
The
right.
more relationships you build, the more you can think of
They're
what talent
pre-referenced.
do I want,
Right.
and then
Yeah.
pursue that person.
Right. So one of the most important things to vet, given the unique structure and demand of a startup, budget is the most important thing. And then we've talked about a lot of those considerations as you're looking at, vetting the structure of your people operations. How fast, slow should you hire? So the entrepreneurs say hire slow, fire fast. It depends, right? So an HR person, our favorite term is it depends because every situation is different. But I'm a big fan of vetting, making sure that you know who you're hiring. So the founder of FYE Music and Movies, his favorite thing was to go to a bagel shop in Stuyvesant Plaza at 6 a.m. and see who he met, and then he would just hire them on the spot. He hired me on the spot, by the way. And he didn't interview me, and thank God his head of loss prevention, my friend Dale, he's the one who interviewed me because, oh my God, I'm like the senior HR leader and no one interviewed me. That's just like, just gave me the chills. So should you take in college volunteers in your team? No, unless you're a nonprofit. And I don't think, do you have nonprofits? No, I don't think you do. For-profits can't use volunteers. Interns, they made it so complicated for interns to be unpaid because, I was an assembly intern through SUNY Albany. I got a stipend. It was great. It's very hard to get interns to work for no money, and you can't have them do clerical stuff. It has to be related. They have to get it approved by the university. It has to be related to their degree. So no, pay your interns.
And also it just adds time too, because at one time I was trying to help a company like set that up with like UAlbany, and there's lead time associated with getting like what you want to do approved and getting job descriptions reviewed and getting it set up, and actually like you're a semester off.
That's right.
Having interns, even if you can do it.
That's right.
So if you have like an immediate need, like it's just not going to fulfill it. If you're in the current semester, like you couldn't have someone work for you right now because they would need to be like, okay, we're going to talk about this for like next semester. Like you'd have to work with that department and whoever's in charge of like maybe that department or one of the leadership in like business school or whatever. And basically you had to come up with a job description for what you're gonna have them do. You had to be able to demonstrate that it like was basically academic and
it's not fair.
stuff.
You're not making
because they're going to review the responsibilities, because before this school or any other school will say we will grant credit for that, there's a review process. So like it's not that it's impossible, it's just that it's very immediate. Like and I just that just takes time, right? Like so just getting the necessary approvals for them to say, okay, we will grant credit for this. So then you're covered. Because like you can't, I wouldn't have them start working for you in the hopes that they get credit. No. Then you're exposed.
No.
But also if you're paying them, it doesn't matter. Like you could also pursue credit. You're paying them minimum wage, and you're also trying to get them credit. You could pursue that while you're doing it.
That's best practice. That's best practice. Even if again, I got a full semester credit, and they gave us a really generous stipend. That's ideal. Also, something to be aware of with unpaid interns for credit, you can do it. New York State passed a law that has made it very complicated to justify a for-credit unpaid intern. There's a whole list of rules.
And that's what the university has to review. That's right. Everything and your job description, everything you have to do, and it to be able to say you are clear to do that.
So this is a very academic question. Not to be ironic, but what should I have a chief of staff help build the infrastructure? And Chris, read that question. What do you think?
Okay. Yeah, especially I even look to like a consultant who does compliance work, even an attorney who does a lot of compliance and regulatory work, because they would be, it's funny, I'm in the process of hiring a chief compliance officer actually for New York Creates over
Yeah.
here. And like that kind of stuff that you need to track, there are law firms and other types of consultants that specialize entirely in navigating like federal regulatory compliance, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they would probably be able to do that, and it wouldn't be like I have to hire someone, but you would want them to review it.
We answered the question the same way,
Yeah.
but you just did it more intelligently than I did.
Is that what, like?
So thanks, that's great. That's the answer to that question. So is this the final question? Yes.
Because the other thing is, if you try to hire a chief of staff, like you also have to vet whether or not that person will
Yeah,
be
get a
capable
consultant.
of, qualified for doing that job, and it's very
It's very
high
difficult.
stakes.
Yes, no, hire a consultant, but a real consultant, not a person that should be an employee. So Chris and I deal with this all the time. You know, the question is, how do we best structure our HR policies to maintain a strict 50-50 hybrid in-office culture, while competing against fully remote tech competitors? And I think you have to be at least hybrid if you want to compete for talent.
You do, and you would be like, you'd be surprised how many people really do crave the
They want to
in-person
be here, they
interaction.
want to be in,
There are
right?
a lot of people I talk to who've been working like remotely for sometimes big giants locally, and they're like, I kind of miss like having like colleagues to go see, and sometimes they just like the anchor of being able to come into an
I
office.
know
So
someone like that.
yeah, you see that more than you would think.
So
And then also, you're not competing with tech giants. You're not paying what they're
Right.
paying.
yeah,
Like, it's a different opportunity. Part of it isn't just how much
Flexibility.
you're paying and the flexibility. It's
Right.
like the mission. Like when I hire, like from hiring leadership for a nonprofit R&D center, that large as it may be, the people who could do that job for industry make way more.
yeah,
Right. So
that's right.
it's about selling like the opportunity, right? Like you're gonna make the impact that you're gonna make. You cannot compete on price.
No,
So being able to work from home is not the variable that is the issue here.
it's flexibility.
Yeah, it's flexibility, and it's also like, what do they want, right?
Yeah,
And
and it's different from hire to hire. Now, what I have seen and implemented myself is you have your real high value, high contribution employees. Remember, we couldn't hire UI UX software developers because they're like so rare. They refused to work on site, and they could. So
I had a client recently who wanted to hire a DevOps engineer and have them be 100% in office. And
yeah,
I'm like, you do realize that like the very nature of the role defies that, and no,
Yeah.
like.
so I recommend, if you're asking for structure, high contribution, very qualified. They're important employees to your business. And if you're hiring entry level, consider it a tiered structure where the entry level kind of works up to hybrid and even remote.
And you can define it by role, right, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not an all or nothing for all jobs. Any other questions? It's a great question. So there are, it's called co-employment. So even though they're on somebody's payroll, I'll give you an example. I only have bad news stories, sorry. We, at FYE Music and Movies, we had a distribution center in California, and we hired a lot of temps for that distribution center, and it made sense. Until one of them decided to lean into a conveyor mechanism and stick their hand in the mechanism because they wanted the loss of use award. They wanted money. And that's us. Even though they were a temp, they were working in our facility. So you have to be aware of co-employment. I don't think any of you are really doing blue collar, heavy duty people who can get hurt.
That leads to a point, like any of those organizations, whether it's a temp agency or it's an EOR or anything along those lines, pay careful attention to the agreement.
Yes.
Because
agreed.
the agreement is where they're going to try to like de-risk to an extent. Like
Yeah,
they're
they're
gonna have
you.
limitations on liability in there potentially, and you just
They
want to
should
make
have.
sure that
Have your lawyer
fully
look at it.
understand that, have an attorney look at it, just so they can like, okay, you're not completely shielded, you're definitely like, it helps and it saves you some money and it saves you some trouble, but you're not like completely off the hook.
Great question. Yes. So this happens once a week. whether I was inside HR or in my business. I want to fire someone. Okay, what do you have in the file? Nothing.
Right.
So document, 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 and you have to take care with your documentation. You can't, I had one issue with a senior vice president who wrote on a performance review, John needs to stop smoking or he's gonna die. And John died. Thank God I changed it before he gave that to John. Can you imagine if his wife found that? So you have to be very careful with your documentation. It has to be objective. It has to be about those KPIs, the SMART goals. Don't make it about what you think of them as a person. Subjective.
Right.
And, I don't think this is a great guideline, but I think it's, you want to treat them fairly. That's why you document. And so when you get the questionnaire, if you fire the employee, the Department of Labor will ask you, did you give them a final warning before you terminated them? And if you didn't, they automatically get unemployment. They'll automatically get unemployment anyway. So I don't know if you know how unemployment insurance works. You don't pay it dollar for dollar. You pay a rate, and your rate might go up.
And it's experience-based insurance,
It is.
like a lot like driving or anything else.
That's
So
right.
if you don't have a lot of turnover, like you tend to have a favorable rate. But yeah, thankfully you don't pay dollar for dollar. It's not as bad as some people.
Yeah, thankfully. That's a great question. So, yeah, I would start with the 101 saying,
Yeah,
what's going on?
you would fill it out exactly.
Absolutely.
Right, exactly.
Absolutely.
Know your people.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's, just like you're building relationships with your clients and your vendors, it's the same thing with employees.
Yeah.
I mean, the way I was trained, you would just not talk to them and then you'd show up with a write-up or terminate them, and that was horrible.
Yeah. Exactly.
So
Right, catch them up.
I think it's pretty consistent, and no matter what your organization is.
I think it's probably more of company size than
Yeah.
specific
There
legal structure.
are numbers, there are thresholds of numbers of employees that trigger. And, but they're really going after small employers. I mean, especially in New York State, they used to have laws that didn't apply to employers with 4 or less employees. They've stopped doing that. So.
Yeah, like the thing that Joe said yesterday about the having to offer a retirement plan of some sort, he said it was like 10 or less employees or something.
Yeah.
But
So
it used to be 50 was the threshold that I always had in my last company. I had like 40-ish employees. I
Right.
never wanted to cross 50 because I knew other things would kick in that I'd have to deal with. But some of those that come out, you gotta watch out because there's like that one was like 10.
there's a new law that, if you, is it 4 employees?
I know it's less than 10.
It's less
said
than
it
10.
quickly. I didn't get a chance to look into it.
If you don't, and it kicks in May, I think, if you don't have, even a simple IRA set up for your employees, New York State's gonna set up a program for you.
Oh, okay.
So, and it's, what did Joe say? It was not something where you can switch investments around or anything.
No. And
It's not great.
so this stuff pops up all the time too. And like what I find helpful is, I know Deb puts out content now and then, but also employment attorneys do a lot of newsletters.
Yeah.
Joan Marie Dowling, BS&K.
There's so much great
all this stuff.
information from law
They
firms.
put this, you get on their email list and they'll be like, hey, you should be aware this just came out. Because of course, that is an opportunity to engage. A lot of these employment lawyers get on like their email lists and you'll get
You get a lot of
notified.
information.
And chambers and stuff to some extent will do that. and
Lawyers.
Whatever, but yeah, the lawyers are on
Lawyers.
top of it.
So, I love playing with Gemini. So I put all of my favorite law firms
Yeah.
into Gemini, and I said, troll their websites and give me their analysis of this particular law.
No, that's
It
smart.
was really cool. I actually had a question yesterday from one of our colleagues. So he's hiring a pregnant employee, and I'm like, yay, great. She's due in 6 weeks. And he said, what are the rules? I said, I'm pretty sure it's 26 weeks. They have to work for you for 26 weeks for PFL. And yes, and it's consecutive weeks. So an employee has to work for you 26 consecutive weeks. So your PFL is a rider on your New York State statutory disability, so you have to have it.
Sure.
So that's the tenure. For disability, they have to work 4 consecutive weeks. And what I mentioned, I don't know if you were there yesterday when I mentioned this, owners can have PFL too. I've had some clients where the first time an owner did that, I'm like, wow, that's so cool. You can do that. Owners can use PFL. So remember that applies to you too.
If you're set up to take a W-2 from your business?
Correct.
Okay, so that might be with the structural coming in place. So like if you're an S corp or something like that, if you're structured such that you're taking partially a W-2 salary out of your business instead of just draws,
Right.
you could set yourself up for that too.
So the trend I'm seeing is that owners and founders are typically setting themselves up as employees. Yeah. Yes. You know, I don't know if the Department of Labor still does this. They used to have a startup program to get, again, before you hire your first employee or as you're hiring your first employee. I would do it before because then they'll come in and visit you. They tell you what you need to do to get set up from a compliance standpoint. So that's also an option. I think they still do that, but I'm not sure.
You had kind of like a starter kit type of
Yeah,
stuff too that you pulled together.
I do.
Necessity.
Thanks, Chris. So I thought that I couldn't work with startups, and startups kept asking me for help. So I have a product where it's a cookbook on everything you need to do. I included some of it in here, but not all of it. And then there are a couple of hours of my consulting time. I'm your HR big sister. So that came out of, I kept getting asked the question. So I do something like that. Thanks, Chris.